Hello, everybody. Edre here, and for anybody new here, I make casual reviews that are just my opinion, so take everything I say with a massive grain of salt. But today I'm going to be doing another video of just great albums. I know this is relatively soon, only about a week after the last one, but I was going back and listening to some of my old favorites as well as trying to find some new stuff. And to be honest, one of them that I got recently appeared on this list, and when I say got, I mean I picked it up at a record store, so to say the least, I'm going to have some fun here. Let's just get right into it. The first album I'm going to be talking about today is from The Lookouts. It's the one that is sitting right there. Spy Rock Road, or its sort of reissue in Spy Rock Road was from 1989, but then there was like a reissue in 2015 with a lot of their other material. But either way, Spy Rock Road and Other Stories from 1989/2015. The material from this Northern California and sort of East Bay related punk band in the late 80s is some of the most fun and just juvenile punk I have heard. The 1989 album, Spy Rock Road, and its subsequent reissue in 2015, which like I said includes many of their other releases as well, perfectly encapsulates the sort of off-the-grid, carefree, and comedic sound of the California punk band. The band would definitely become notorious later on throughout time because Trey Cool was in this band. This was really his first real band. He was the drummer and did sing and write a lot of the songs. Obviously, does he need an introduction? He would go on to become the drummer for Green Day. Obviously, a classic band without a doubt, but also the Lookouts would also become notorious for sort of being the namesake of Lookout Records, as well as Larry Livermore being in the band. It really was an important band in the early days of Lookout Records, one of my personal favorite punk labels. Without a doubt, if you are looking for some fun, youthful, off-the-grid style, kind of in-the-woods type punk, the Lookouts is for you, and Spy Rock Road and its reissue perfectly land on this list if this is what you're looking for. The next album I'm going to be talking about is from 1994, and it is 9 Inch Nails' The Downward Spiral. I already have talked about Pretty Hate Machine, and I usually try not to cover too many artists more than once, but sometimes I just have to make exceptions. And on the long-awaited follow-up to the spectacular Pretty Hate Machine, Trent Reznor continued to build upon his industrial style, but embraced much more elements of industrial rock and industrial metal over the synth pop that was present on Pretty Hate Machine. Without a doubt, this is one of the most important, one of the best, and just one of the most influential, industrial rock and metal albums, not only of the 90s, but of all time. It has been influential on many artists since, and I think that kind of goes without saying. Many industrial artists since then cite 9 Inch Nails as an influence. Also, the thing that really grabs my attention about the Downward Spiral is also the way it is written. It is a concept album essentially about a man's downward spiral. And, well, the theme might be dark, it might be depressing. The way he writes it is very interesting and definitely drags me in as a listener. It's very well written. And like I said, even though I have talked about Pretty Hate Machine, there's just so much going on Downward Spiral, and I think it has aged perfectly, and its influence seems to grow with every year that goes by, so I had to talk about the Downward Spiral. The next album I'm going to be talking about is also from 1994. That's a really good year of music, what can I say? It is from Sunny Day Real Estate, Diary. Once again, I need to reiterate, like I did in my last installment in this series, I am not always the biggest fan of emo pop, Midwest emo, any of that sound, because, while there are many groups that I enjoy a lot, there is also a lot of groups that I really do not enjoy. At the end of the day, bands like Blink-182, Fall Out Boy, Panic at the Disco do little to really intrigue me, and little in their sound brings me back. However, and honestly, even a band like American Football, as praised as they are, I also have a bit of a hard time with their sound as well. But the debut album from Sunny Day Real Estate is sort of like the bridge between post-hardcore, grunge as well. It's sort of like the bridge from that to some of the more emo punk, emo pop that would come later on in the late 90s and in the 2000s. Overall, it's just a very, very solid album that I think has definitely become one of the most influential albums of its time, definitely influencing almost every emo group and band like that would come after. to be honest, it's one of those albums and bands that I never really dived too deep into until relatively recently, and I am glad that I finally got around to doing it. I think vocally it's a much more intriguing album. The singer has a nice grunginess to his voice while still having that more emo emotion. However, he doesn't have that stereotypical emo voice that you hear on Blink-182, Red Jumpsuit Apparatus, etc. To me, it's just an extremely solid album with some good grunge influence in there, post-hardcore influence in there, and it is the precursor to some of the emo pop that would come later. So I think Diary by Sunny Day Real Estate is a really quintessential album. The next album I'm going to be talking about is from 1998, and it is Placebo's Without You, I'm Nothing. I've always been quite aware of Placebo, and I've always listened to a fair amount of Placebo's material, but it wasn't until recently that I actually sat down and actually listened to Without You, I'm Nothing in a more in-depth way. In contrast to their debut album, I feel like Placebo adopted a much more mellow sound on many of these tracks on Without You, I'm Nothing. To me, it's another one that's like a very important album for alternative rock in the 90s, especially with, I feel like, Placebo really polishing up their sound, becoming a bit more well-rounded, really made for one of the most interesting experiences. Production-wise, I think the more spacious production, especially the more mellow tracks, really brings new life into their sound that may have been missing on their debut, and the more personal and vulnerable lyrics on this album really make this just my personal favorite from Placebo. It's one of the most emotional albums that they have out there. Brian Malko's writing, I think, is even better on this album than it was on their debut, and quite frankly, I think it's better than much of the stuff that came after. Solid track list, some excellent deep cuts as well. Overall, I think Placebo is sort of a criminally overlooked band in many ways, and I think that they deserve much more appreciation. The next album I'm going to be talking about is from 2000, and it is from At the Drive-In, Relationship of Command, from 2000. At the Drive-In's blend of, traditional post-hardcore with, once again, some emo elements in there would foreshadow the direction of both genres over the next decade. With some of the heavier, more punk, more post-hardcore sections of this album kind of being a little bit reminiscent of bands like Fugazi, whereas some of the more emotional, some of the more emo moments on here are a bit more reminiscent of the previously mentioned Sunny Day Real Estate. Though unlike many other artists of this style in the 2000s, Relationship of Command is, to me, one of the most true and honest sounding albums of this genre. It doesn't sound like they hopped on any trends, they didn't hop on any bandwagons, they were kind of doing what they had already been doing, but really just out of nowhere made a relatively solid album that was even better than what they had done before. Once again, another thing that really makes this album stand out to me as a listener and as somebody who listens to many other, albums other than this, it's a very influential album. One of the most influential albums of the 2000s, arguably. Definitely one of the most influential albums in post-hardcore and in emo. Especially when post-hardcore had already been really prevalent in the 80s and 90s. And then you have a band like At the Drive-In bring some new elements into it, some more emotional vulnerability into the genre. Really pushed it in new directions. And just about every band of this similar style that has come after has cited At the Drive-In and this album, Relationship of Command, as an influence. Without a doubt, one of my, definitely another album I didn't get around to listening to until relatively recently, and I am glad I did. Really solid. The next album I'm going to be talking about is from 2002. It is from the legend himself, Johnny Cash. American 4, The Man Comes Around. It's funny enough, after listening to Nine Inch Nails' The Downward Spiral, it inspired me to go back and listen to the Johnny Cash cover of Hurt and his subsequent American recording series, I think that some of his best material in his entire career was released in the 90s and in the 2000s up until his unfortunate death with the American recording series. Some of his most well-produced material, some of his most well-picked covers, some of his best written material. In many ways, he was riding high until the end. And while there's much debate as to which album in the series is the best, many people prefer the first American recording, some people like the second and third. I personally think the fourth one is the real standout one to me. American 4 was the last album that was released during his lifetime, and I honestly think, well, it might sound cliche, that's a big reason why I think it is as impactful as it is. Because the covers that he picked are some of the most interesting covers I think he's done, and also just some of the most touching cover songs and kind of like heartfelt cover songs, and some of his most heartfelt original material is found on this album as well. Some of the covers that really stick out to me are his covers of Hurt, Bridge Over Troubled Water, and In My Life by the Beatles. Some of the most haunting covers, especially considering he only died not long after this album was released. And I will say I am also quite fond of his cover of, Depeche Mode's Personal Jesus, a band that I talk about a little too much possibly on this channel. However, I'm not ashamed of it. Needless to say, he has so many albums that it is almost impossible to actually get around to listening to all of them. But if there is one album that I have come back to more than his others, it is his final album, American 4, The Man Comes Around. I think some of his best material, some of his best covers, and some of his most emotional material. So yeah, I feel pretty comfortable putting the final Johnny Cash album of his lifetime on this list. The next album I'm going to be talking about is, I apologize for the abundance of more emo-oriented stuff for those of you who aren't into that, but My Chemical Romance, 3 Cheers for Sweet Revenge. My Chemical Romance, or MCR, is just a weird band for me. Oftentimes on the surface they don't grab my attention that much, but when they do, they really, really, really seem to do. The Black Parade seems to get the most praise in their discography, and understandably so. It is in many ways their most ambitious work, their most theatric work. However, I feel like the more theatric elements of it, the concept album thing, the whole rock opera thing, and some of the more theatrical moments of it, and just the really arena rock style production, honestly, in my opinion, just hasn't aged that well compared to 3 Cheers. It doesn't feel as honest or as, direct as 3 Cheers for Sweet Revenge does. I would honestly feel like if I had to review The Black Parade, I might give it a high 6 out of 10, maybe a 7. But 3 Cheers for Sweet Revenge, in my opinion, is MCR's best album. 3 Cheers is their most honest and pure album, I think, and is also just one of their most well-constructed projects as well. It's more raw and but more well-rounded than their debut album. And in my opinion, it was definitely the highlight of, and arguably one of the best albums to come out of the 2000s sort of emo pop genre. And while I get it, people don't like labeling MCR in any one specific genre. Nobody likes being put in any one specific genre, but that's not a bad thing. They really were one of the few bands of the era that were really continuing to push it in new directions with some of the most solid albums, and 3 Cheers for Sweet Revenge is an album that has actually grown on me more than it has weakened on me. I cannot say the same for The Black Parade. Needless to say, I've come back to this one quite a bit. It might be embarrassing for some of the more music nerd people out there who criticize MCR, but I think that 3 Cheers for Sweet Revenge from 2004 is definitely MCR's best album. The next album I'm going to be talking about is from 2010, and it is... Where is it? Right there. King of the Beach by Wavves. I was debating talking about this because about a year ago I did a Wavves Worst to Best. My opinions have changed a little bit, but after gaining notoriety for his noise rock, lo-fi, slacker, surf punk sound on his previous album, Nathan Williams really polished up his sound while still keeping all the elements that made his music working on on his other album. On King of the Beach, he took all the things that worked on the last one, but really polished it up and a bit more accessible, a bit more traditional song structures. And the end result, in my opinion, was an album that had even more summer vibes and even more indie sound than his previous release. And just good songwriting and everything I liked about the other album that he had put out before. In my opinion, King of the Beach has aged tremendously well. It's one of my favorite summer albums to this day. A great sort of surf punk sound, very slackery sound as well, but I think that it's aged arguably the best in his discography, and definitely the one I come back to the most, other than maybe Afraid of Heights. But I really felt like I wanted to give that album a quick shout out on this video. The next album I'm going to be talking about is from Radiohead frontman Thom Yorke, Tomorrow's Modern Boxes from 2014. I don't want to keep talking about Radiohead in every single episode, but Thom Yorke's solo material is in many ways a completely different beast. Definitely my favorite solo album from him. It definitely is Tomorrow's Modern Boxes. I think it has some of my favorite glitch pop material in not only his career, but in the 2010s in general. And some of, I think, Thom Yorke's best musical compositions on like the transition from Pink section and the Nose Grows Some. Overall, I think it's almost a nearly flawless track list, to tell you the truth. I saw him on this tour when it was, I think, 2018 maybe, and excellent show. Hearing these songs live really gives it a whole new experience. And overall, I just think that I wish this album got a little more attention. I think it is his best, most solid studio album, solo from Radiohead. I just wanted to give that one a quick shout out because I wish it got more coverage, and unfortunately, it doesn't seem to. And the final album I'm going to be talking about in today's video is one that might not be massively acclaimed, one that might be viewed as not the best to many people, but Doja Cat, Hot Pink from 2019. Okay, I know that this might be a guilty pleasure for some people, but I genuinely think out of all the pop singers of, that sort of transcend hip-hop, Doja Cat is one of the most interesting, entertaining, and I think talented ones of the bunch. To me, it has grown on me a ton, and I honestly love the way she expanded her sound on Hot Pink. She just has a bit of a sassy, goofy, and carefree attitude, and she does it over some of the most fun, entertaining, and just good instrumentals and beats. It just makes for a really great, fun album with an extremely strong track list, one of the best pop albums of recent years, but even though it has some pretty strong highlights, and, well, there are some, kind of conventional, hip-hop, pop type hits on here, there is a good amount of variety on here as well, and I think Doja Cat's able to execute it all really well, from the pop R&B smash hit Say So, which has one of the most catchy and just infectious hooks. I personally love it, to the smooth track Rules, which she just has this saucy delivery and groove on there. Excellent. And then the much more darker, much more mellow song Streets is another one. And I also want to bring up Bottom Bitch, one of the more emo rap-inspired tracks as well, at least instrumentally. Overall, I think on Hot Pink, Doja Cat really has proved that she is growing as an artist, and I can't wait to see where she goes next. I have a suspicion she might put out something this year, possibly next year. Either way, I'm really looking forward to it, and I could only hope that it is just as good as Hot Pink. And with that being said, those are the 10 albums from The Lookouts, 9 Inch Nails, Sunny Day Real Estate, Placebo, At the Drive-In, Johnny Cash, MCR, Wavves, Thom Yorke, and Doja Cat that have made it into my great album series. For just a quick little send-off, I don't expect me to do these as often as I have been. I just have been very preoccupied with listening to a bunch of albums that I loved previously, like classic albums I already have loved, as well as finding new albums to listen to. So that's just why I've been doing it some more. It's not really that consistent of a series, but that is it for now. Hope you guys enjoy. I recommend everybody check out these albums. In my opinion, they are all great. But keep in mind, it is just my opinion, so take everything I say with a massive grain of salt.